My name is On Lin Wang. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm based in Philadelphia, a member of Philly DSA, and I serve as a co-chair for DSA's International Committee as well. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight for the second entry of our webinar series about China, hosted by our China Working Group. This second entry is about the development of environmental policy in China. And I just want to talk very briefly about why it is this is our second entry in the series and what DSA has to do with environmental policy in China. Just to provide a bit more context and background here, in 2021, DSA passed a political platform for the organization. In that political platform, there are two planks related to China. One is calling for an end to US escalation and warmongering, and another is to call for cooperation on global issues, namely and especially climate change. And so that's what brings us here today. Those who follow the news are probably aware that our current administration is not so enthusiastic about the possibility of climate cooperation with China. But it's also the case that we are facing the biggest climate crisis, world crisis facing humanity certainly in many epochs. In particular, it looks like we will hit 2 or 3 degrees Celsius global warming by 2050, which is likely to trigger the loss of billions of lives by the end of this century, as estimated by even not socialist, not left-wing professional organizations and scientific analysts out there. And so what we hope to accomplish with a webinar like this is to start the process of building an understanding of possibilities of climate cooperation between the US and China. Right now, it's just the case that without much of an understanding of what has been the environmental policy development in China, it's difficult to even imagine, pull out of the abstract, what potential climate cooperation could even mean, and especially how that cooperation could benefit the US working class as well. And so that's why we wanted to have our next entry in this series be led by Kyle Ferrana here. Kyle is a longtime researcher of Chinese public policy. He is an author of a book, Why the World Needs China. And he's also an organizer and with Portland DSA. So before I turn this floor over to Kyle to give us a presentation, the chat is on. So please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. And I just want to also introduce one other thing too. I want to promote this at the end as well. We will also be starting a reading group series for the China Working Group, for the International Committee. To start that, we are just going to have an initial sign-up form, and then based on the response to the sign-up form, that'll determine what the first reading will be. I included the sign-up form has a list of the potential readings it might be. That's not an exhaustive list, just some of the ones that have been brainstormed up to this point. So I'll drop that link in the chat. Please feel free to fill it out during this or during after this webinar, preferably after. And feel free to reach out to our email with any questions as well. I'll leave that in the chat as well. Without further ado, let me turn this over to Kyle, who will lead us on our presentation. And after that, we'll have some time for questions for him as well. Oh, last thing, 4 questions you have for Kyle that you want us to get to. There is a Q&A feature in the Zoom, should be at the bottom. There should be a series of buttons at the bottom, like a menu, where you can like mute yourself, where I think that should be turned off here. But there should be a section for a chat, and there should be a question icon for Q&A. Click on that icon, and feel free to submit questions to us there. We'll get to as many as we can at the end. So without much further ado, Kyle, can you take us away?
Yes, thank you so much for that kind introduction. I'll just add, as you mentioned, I live in Portland. I'm also a member of the Friends of Socialist China Coalition, abbreviated FOSC. and a volunteer for the Oregon China Council. And I just want to explain how I got involved in studying and writing about China's political economy as succinctly as I can. And I'll just say that around 2018 or so, it just sort of became obvious, to me at least, that China is the only large country in the world where life has been getting significantly better for everyone in it. And here in the US, it's been very frustrating to spend years in local organizing and take part in multiple nationwide protest movements and still see life continue to get worse for the people who are already the worst off. There is this massive disconnect here between what our government does and what the people need and want that doesn't really exist in China. Just to give what I think is one of the clearest examples of this contrast is the protest movement in 2020 here, where one of the central demands, defund the police, was not only not enacted, our local governments increased police funding instead. And in China, a few years later, when there was a mass protest against the zero COVID policy, their government ended the zero COVID almost immediately. So to me, it basically makes sense to look at the People's Republic of China as a good example of a government that is more able to express the will of its people. Um, on that note, I'll start my slideshow. I'm just gonna share my screen. Can you all see this? Okay. All right. Uh, so the way I'm doing this presentation, I'm just going to start by giving you a lot of facts and figures about environmentalism and renewable energy, and then at the end, I'm going to talk more about what's behind these policies, how China was able to accomplish all of it, as well as address some common myths and misconceptions.
Thank
Uh,
you, Kyle. Just one quick heads up. It's not in the presenter view mode, if that's okay with you. I think that that's okay with me, but just a heads up. Cool.
you're still able to see it?
I see the total slides and the slide prop. Yeah, I think that's the presenting. Fine, cool.
Okay. So these images, this is on the left here is the China's high-speed rail map. It's very zoomed out because it's so large. Um, we have some workers planting trees. In the center is the Shanghai maglev, which is first a magnetic levitation train in action. And then at the top is a floating solar farm in Anhui province, which is floating in a former coal mine that was filled with water and is now being used to generate power this way. On the right, there's some offshore wind turbines. As I'll mention later on, China has the most offshore wind power out of any country in the world. And in the lower right, this graph is sort of a semi-famous graph now, I suppose, of the total solar power capacity in the world, graphed against the various predictions of various NGOs, international institutions, estimating what it would be instead. Um, and it really demonstrates how the Chinese solar industry has defeated exceeded expectations so consistently. So first, let's talk about the Chinese solar industry itself. And um, this photo in the background is a molten salt solar array, which I got this image from the internet, but I've seen one of these myself in the Gobi Desert as part of the FOSS delegation, and it really is incredible up close. Um, the timeline goes that about 20 years ago, the solar industry was pretty small and just focused on exporting to developed Western countries. And when the 2008 financial crash happened, and European countries enacted some protectionist policies that completely destroyed the market and caused some bankruptcies of the biggest Chinese solar companies. So at that point, it was sort of considered to be a big example of government waste and inefficiency and a failure of industrial policy. But just 3 years later, China was producing more solar than any other country in the world. And by 2021, it was producing over 80% of the total solar production. And now, in recent years, they're reached the point where they're installing more new solar capacity than twice the rest of the world. Uh, and now, as of last year, they have about more than 1 terawatt of local domestic capacity, which is approximately enough to power about 800 million homes.
Thank you, Kyle. Sorry to interrupt again. I think we lost the slides again. Is there a presenter view mode that just lets you go through the slides directly without it always reverting back to the screen edit to the place where you can edit the slides?
Um, I mean, I can just advance them in non-presentation mode if that is better.
Okay. I think that can work. Would you be able to remove the properties section bar on the right?
Probably. Oh
Thank
gosh.
you for the patience, everyone. I swear we did do a tech check before we began here. Some people who logged on
Uh,
early can testify. So
there is this. Does this look better?
I think that works for me. Can some people in the audience let us know. Is that viewable now? Okay. I think that should work. All right.
Okay,
Thank you,
cool.
Kyle.
All right, so here's some of the consequences of this of the Chinese solar industry. This sort of meteoric rise is that now countries that has huge implications for the world because the price of Chinese solar panels is now so low that even the poorest countries in the world are be able to import them in large quantities. And this is a really under-discussed aspect of the global transition to renewable energy, which is what about all the people who had no electricity or modern transportation to begin with? And our media is very concerned about replacing existing fossil fuel infrastructure, but I think often doesn't consider how developing countries are supposed to develop without using fossil fuels. Every developed country today, including China, burned a lot of fossil fuels to get to the point where they are now, and it's now thanks to China that this our alternative path to development now exists. So, in models and predictions of the future, it's not necessarily the case that poor countries who don't produce a lot of emissions and are very underdeveloped will need to stay underdeveloped in order to cut emissions. There is a green path to development, thanks in large part to this expansion of solar energy. And it's not just African countries, also Central Asia and Latin America. There are Chinese solar projects in Argentina, Cuba, Kyrgyzstan, especially Pakistan. A lot of these are just rooftop solar panels that is not connected to the electrical grid because the electrical grids in many of these countries either don't exist in rural areas or are old and broken down or too expensive for most people to afford. In Pakistan, there's so much off-grid solar now that in some cities it produces almost as much electricity as the electrical grid itself does. And a lot of these other Central Asian countries are still running on old Soviet era electrical infrastructure, which is not like a dig at Soviet infrastructure. It's just that it just hasn't been maintained since the collapse of the Soviet Union. So it's like 30 or 40 years old infrastructure that is starting to fail. And now this is sort of a cheap option to modernize. So here I'm going to talk about some of the various categories of green technology and how China is the world leader in every single one. And in fact, in these categories below, the current rate of production that China is maintaining is more than the rest of the world combined. You might hear that phrase a few times in this presentation. But as you can see through um, this infographic here in the lower right, the increase has sort of kind of leaned into this exponential or near exponential curve just in the early 2020s, and the rates of increase it's still increasing every year. Like each new year, new records are being set. So we haven't yet leveled off in terms of how much production is going on. So we're sort of still in this ramping up phase. Um, let's see. Right, and I just want to examine here how China's closest economic peer, the United States, is moving entirely in the opposite direction. And as you can see from this incredible infographic, courtesy of the failing New York Times, which managed to succeed in this case, I think that in general, our media is being a little more open and honest about Chinese environmentalism now that Trump is president again, and sort of it's sort of more important to highlight how far the U.S. is behind because of the Trump administration's policies of canceling renewable energy projects and reorienting our economy or deepening our orientation toward fossil fuels. Right. So you can see here that green technology like batteries, solar panels, electric cars, China exports an enormous amount, while the United States exports almost none. And in terms of fossil fuels, the U.S. Of course, exports an enormous amount, and China exports almost none. So it doesn't really it doesn't just make economic sense for other countries to choose or it doesn't just make environmental sense for other countries to choose Chinese renewables over US fossil fuels. It makes a lot of economic sense too, because something like an electric car or a solar panel can last decades, whereas with oil and natural gas, you get burnt, it gets burned once and then it's gone. So it's basically like a one-time price for a product versus a subscription model. And it makes a lot of political sense to uh, choose the Chinese model here because a subscription can just be turned off whenever the US feels like it, or if you do something they don't like, and it can be surge priced basically when when there's an opportunity to do so. For example, uh, how the US increased the price of liquid natural gas shipments to Europe after they were cut off from Russian natural gas pipelines a few years ago. And I just want to take a moment to talk about Cuba, where the U.S. blockade of Cuba is increasing. The intensity is increasing. They're now trying to cut Cuba off from oil shipments from Venezuela and Mexico, and this is creating an even worse crisis in Cuba. And uh, sort of their only option that they're trying to establish now is solar energy and electric vehicles, which obviously China is the supplier, and they're trying to install these as quickly as they can because that's really the only way to energy independence, right? Cuba doesn't have oil of its own, but there's plenty of sunlight, so and that's something that is currently not possible to blockade. We'll see, I guess, but um, I think should probably mention that like right now Cuba needs all the help it can get. Um, I feel like it's probably the most vulnerable target of the U.S. empire at the moment because it's so reliant on trade. And unlike Iran and China, they have it a little harder in Cuba because they were directly colonized for so long, and their agricultural center was so the agricultural sector was so oriented toward cash crops rather than food. Um, so I hear that, you know, if you're going to Cuba, every little bit helps. You should take like medical supplies with you. High-speed rail. So as you may know, China has the world's largest high-speed rail network. In fact, there's more high-speed rail in China than the rest of the world combined. Over 30,000 miles right now, and all of that was built in less than 20 years. Meanwhile, the United States has spent almost that long to build just one high-speed rail track in California, and it's still not done. The difference really couldn't be more stark. The policy in China is to build high-speed rail connection to um, every country, every city that has more than 500,000 people, which in China is quite a few cities, of course. But now they're reaching a point where they have that level of connectivity, and now that their domestic network is developed, they're building high-speed rail in other countries. Indonesia and Laos have recently completed high-speed rail lines with the assistance of Chinese companies, and they're currently constructing more in some neighboring countries like Nepal, Kyrgyzstan, Thailand, Vietnam. Uh, and I just want to mention that railroads, as we know, is the most efficient method of transporting humans from one city to another. And in China, there are billions of passenger trips uh, on Chinese trains every year. And I just kind of shudder to think if uh, all those people would were commuting, by personal car during the holidays, what traffic would look like. It really doesn't bear thinking about. Okay, so let's talk about China's journey to embrace environmentalism. So, as you've all heard, I'm sure, 30 years ago or so, the quality of the environment was terrible. There was serious pollution. This image here is of Beijing, before and after, right before the anti-pollution campaign, and now presently. I was actually in Beijing in 2024, um, and the skies were quite clear. It was during the summer as well as quite hot. Um, I was not there in 2012, but I've heard that it was quite bad at that point. So this is mainly a consequence of the reform era, where the government prioritized economic growth and industrial development. And this is the environmental pollution is a big consequence of that, among many others. But this started to change uh, mainly after the 2008 crisis, where China's reaction to it, instead of austerity like Western governments did, China increased public spending and started to focus more on environmental policies, cleaning up the air eventually. This is also around the time when the high-speed rail network started construction. But I do want to point out that there were also a lot of environmentalist efforts still taking place during the 80s and 90s. For example, the tree planting initiatives and protection of endangered species. So it's not really the case that the government just decided to pursue growth at all costs, and then we're like, "Whoops, we made a mistake. Time to reverse course." It was really the plan all along to develop quickly and then redistribute the gains and focus on sustainability. And this quote from Deng Xiaoping, I think, illustrates it pretty well. I'll just read it here. Wealth in a socialist society belongs to the people. To get rich in a socialist society means prosperity for the entire people. The principles of socialism are, first, development of production, and second, common prosperity. We permit some people in some regions to become prosperous first, with the purpose of achieving common prosperity faster. Uh, as you also may know, Common Prosperity, that is the name of the more recent initiative under Xi Jinping to redistribute wealth and raise living standards and increase income of the poorest in China. And this just kind of highlights that this slogan it dates back to the 50s actually, and it's something that the Communist Party has always been keeping in mind, and this is uh, what their goal was all along. And I think that 40 years later, this promise Deng made is starting to come true, and not just in terms of environmental policy, but also the gaps in prosperity in China are shrinking, particularly income gaps between regions and ethnic minority groups. inequality in China overall, as measured by the Gini index, has been falling for about a decade. And I know that Deng is a very controversial figure on the political left these days, but there are some very tangible trends in social development in China that I think are putting more and more credibility to his words here. All right, so reforestation. This is a big long-term project in China, and it's focused a lot on de-desertification. That is, planting enough trees to push the deserts back, um, and reverse the trend of desert expansion, which itself is bad for the environment. Um, and just some statistics here: forest coverage in China has doubled since 1980, and more new trees have been planted there than in the rest of the world combined. And their target every year is to plant enough new trees to cover the land area of Belgium, approximately, which is pretty mind-blowing, uh, for sure. All right, so I'm going to talk about a few other environmental policies here. Um, so it's something of a meme, right? That China's only been economically successful due to its lack of environmental regulations. And this misunderstanding is sometimes used by right-wing politicians in the US and Canada to push a reactionary agenda of further deregulating our own economy and industry. And it really couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, China is one of the only countries in the world that is increasing regulations in the 21st century, both environmental regulations, labor protections, and other regulations on business. And guess what? China is still quite economically very successful. And here are a few of the environmental success stories. Wetland areas. China has expanded its wetland areas and now has more internationally accredited wetland cities than any other country. China is the world leader in mangrove research and one of the few countries in the world to have a net increase in mangrove coverage in the 21st century, about 2% per year. If you're not familiar with mangroves, the top image is of a mangrove grove. They're tropical aquatic trees that are very efficient carbon sinks, and they help prevent coastal erosion and serve as the habitats for a lot of wildlife. Um, Endangered species also, conservation policies in China have recently unendangered some species. They were previously endangered and now they're not. Like the Tibetan antelope, there's currently about 4 times as many Tibetan antelopes in China as there were 30 years ago. So now it's no longer considered an endangered species. And recently, there have been some new national parks established in China, and this is kind of a new concept there. And I think it's a good example of how the Chinese government is able to learn from the accomplishments and mistakes of other countries, notably the United States, which is where the concept is copied from. But what isn't being copied is how the U.S. enclosed land that was already settled by indigenous people to create these parks. So Chinese national parks actually include or incorporate existing rural villages and work with them to maintain the park. And this image there at the bottom is just kind of a cute story. It's in Yunnan, which is a southwestern province. And a few years ago, there was a herd of wild elephants that wandered through the suburbs of the capital, and the government basically just temporarily evacuated people just to let the elephants go by, and no one was hurt. They just sort of followed the elephants with drones the whole way, which I guess made them very popular on social media. Aquaculture is also a very under-discussed topic. Most a lot of Western press publications are still doing a lot of scaremongering about evil Chinese fishing fleets and so on. But actually, the amount of wild ocean fishing done by Chinese vessels has declined over the past decade, thanks in large part to modern fish farming. So again, China is the world leader in fish farming, and the amount of wild ocean fishing taking place in the world is definitely very unsustainable and also very difficult to regulate because it's hard to police the oceans, right? So as a global society, we do need to dramatically reduce the amount of fishing we do, and the easiest way to transition away from it is by farming fish. So as you can see from this graph, aquaculture in China has pretty dramatically expanded over the past few decades. And now the amount of fish that's being harvested from the ocean is declining. It reached a peak in 2015. The size of the Chinese fishing fleet is decreasing. The government is giving them less fuel subsidies and increasing regulations. So we can probably expect further decline, especially as aquaculture technology continues to develop. So agrivoltaics, uh, there's a drawback to every type of renewable energy, right? And in the case of solar panels, a big drawback is the amount of land area they take up, right? Because you need huge fields of these solar panels to generate enough power to be useful. And so that will tie up a lot of land that might otherwise be used for something productive. One way to mitigate this is to put solar panels in the desert, which actually can sometimes help uh, because they provide some shade to the land. And when you clean the solar panels of all the sand and dust and all that, some of the water can drip down and make the land a little more suitable for growing stuff underneath. I've been to one of these solar sub solar panel farms where they were farming root vegetables, which is pretty cool. And these pictures kind of show you some of these examples. They also have cattle and other agricultural stuff going on underneath solar panels, just to try to get the most use they can out of the land. Okay, so here are some of the results of environmental policy, and now we see that domestic demand and carbon emissions from China are starting to decline. And just to anticipate some obvious criticism here, we're not just declaring a peak when we see the first reduction year on year. These are milestones that the government announces ahead of time. And the big news in these cases is that these peaks are often reached ahead of schedule. So, for example, Xi Jinping announced back in 2021 that coal use would peak in 2025, and they managed to do it a year early, peaked in 2024. There was the emissions or the peak emissions goal was originally set to peak in 2030, and it's already peaked. So that's a pretty significant advance, pretty significantly ahead of schedule. Um, and we can be kind of reasonably confident that those rates of decline is going to increase more and more as more electric vehicles and more renewable energies starts getting used, because as you recall, the adoption of those is also quite rapid in China and now in the rest of the world. And of course, I'll mention here there's kind of a propaganda war going on over China's carbon emissions. The anti-China crowd will give you the statistic that China is the world's biggest emitter, and the pro-China folks will show you that China's emissions are actually pretty reasonable per capita. I mean, with such a large population, it's kind of reasonable to expect them to emit more. But I just want to make the point that emissions are more correlated with production than with population. So it makes sense that China emits a lot of CO2 by itself, not just because there are 1.4 billion people in China, but because it has more manufacturing than any other country and manufacturing products that other countries use. So it's not quite fair to blame China for this if other countries are asking to make all their stuff. All right, so this is the biggest environmental question in China is what about coal, right? So a lot of press coverage of China's environmental accomplishments. It's going to take great pains to point out that China burns a lot of coal or is building more coal plants. And unfortunately, this is also a common reactionary talking point in the Western world because it's a good excuse to justify inaction, right? If China is burning so much coal, then anything we do to decarbonize or clean up the environment is going to be useless, so they say. And I just want to offer some perspective here because there's a lot to this topic that typical Western newspapers are not going to tell you. And the first point is that Chinese coal is actually not the dirtiest form of energy. It's true that burning coal releases more carbon, but in fact, it's natural gas rather than coal that has a greater greenhouse effect, right? Because of how much gas escapes during transport. There was a recent study a few years ago by the Rocky Mountain Institute, if you're curious to look it up, that measured this effect and found that natural gas and coal had about a similar effect on the atmosphere, which means that Chinese coal is in fact cleaner because, second point, Chinese coal-fired power plants are the cleanest and most efficient in the world. This decline in pollution that I mentioned wasn't due to burning less coal. It was due to modernizing and increasing regulations on the existing coal burning. So Chinese coal technology is almost twice as efficient as Western coal technology, and they've invested some pretty considerable efforts into modernizing their coal plants. So when you hear news about China building more coal plants, the story is really that they're building newer and more advanced coal plants to replace the older ones that are being shut down because they can't meet new environmental standards. China actually has much stricter emission standards now than the US or the EU. Third, it's true that a lot of China's electricity still comes from coal, but it's actually industrial coal. That is coal that is burned directly in factories rather than in coal-fired power plants that produces the most emissions and pollution. So the real battle right now is to further regulate and clean up dirty industry. So phasing out the coal power plants themselves is not really the biggest concern. Fourth, capacity and usage are not the same. China does need a lot of coal power plants, but they don't need to be used all the time. And in fact, there are some provinces where they're basically not used at all during the day. One of the biggest challenges to renewable energy production is that the power generation peaks during the day because that's when the sun is out, and power demand peaks during the evening. So right now, China is looking for ways to fill that gap, and the only ways to do it are battery storage or nuclear power or coal, because coal and nuclear power can be used any time of day, right? And the former two aren't yet advanced enough to make up the difference. So in the meantime, coal is still used. The graph there is the three major urban industrial areas of China. One is Beijing, Tianjin, Hebei, I believe, and the other are the Pearl and Yangtze River deltas. And shows that how their pollution has declined, and it's really actually such a big decline in the past decade that global pollution has declined as a result. Nuclear energy. So as I mentioned earlier, China is building as much new nuclear power capacity as the rest of the world combined. And I just want to dispel some myths about nuclear energy and explain why this is actually, I think, a very positive thing. So first of all, China has the most advanced nuclear power technology in the world as well. Uh, the power plants that are currently under construction there are the cleanest, safest, and cheapest type of nuclear power that we know how to build. Um, and one component of that is that China is embracing thorium as a nuclear fuel. Thorium reactors were actually invented here in the United States, but they never caught on, partly because they need a large initial investment to develop, and it's also more difficult to use the byproducts of the thorium reaction to make nuclear weapons. But there are a lot of benefits to using it. Mainly, it's more available and easier to mine. It also produces less waste and is more efficient than the traditional uranium. Secondly, new reactors are designed to use fuel in pebble form rather than in the denser fuel rod form, which basically means that these reactors are easier to cool down. They don't have an active cooling system. If something goes wrong in the plant and uh, um, they have to pull the plug or whatever, it'll just cool down by itself. The nuclear disasters that we know of, like the Fukushima disaster, for example, was basically the result of a failure in the emergency cooling mechanism. But a pebble bed reactor does not have an emergency cooling mechanism at all, because if something happens to the operators, it's just going to cool down by itself. They've done a successful test of this a few years ago, where they had the reactor at full power and switch it off, and the reaction never got hot enough to cause damage. Finally, there's still the issue of nuclear waste disposal, but it's going to be a long time before enough waste accumulates from these reactors to pose a problem because they're all so new, right? So while China's building more nuclear reactors than Western countries, they're still behind in terms of the active capacity they have right now, right? So nuclear waste is not yet a big problem. It will be in the future, but of course, carbon emissions are a much more pressing issue. So it kind of makes sense to push forward with nuclear power for backup energy instead. All right, so here I'm going to get into what's behind Chinese environmental policy. And as I'm sure we all know, one of the biggest obstacles to the renewable energy transition here in the US is the fossil fuel lobby, right? China does not have this obstacle. First of all, because they don't have lobbying, and secondly, the big fossil fuel companies in China are state-owned, right? So even where the private sector is involved in China, new energy development is planned for years or decades in advance and led by the state. Um, so new technologies that require a lot of upfront investment, like electrical vehicles or solar panels, are not as attractive to private corporations in the United States because the return on investment is too far in the future. The Chinese government doesn't have to worry about making a profit or delivering a profit to capitalists. It will just make the investments itself. So, specifically regarding lobbying, I want to make the point here that I think the Chinese system is actually a lot more democratic than ours. Because in the US, lobbying basically allows whoever has the most money to buy whatever policies they want, right? And in China, private companies are allowed to suggest new policy. There's an institution for this. It's called I believe it's called the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. I believe that's the correct title, the CPPCC. But there isn't money involved. So the CPPCC is going to make all kinds of suggestions every year to the government, and only some of them are ultimately adopted, right? And this consultative approach is a lot more effective because it's more transparent and it includes delegates from every region and strata of society. In fact, there's even a few in it from Taiwan. So exists more to let the government get kind of a temperature check on what issues are important to the public at large. And if a private corporation wants the government to do something that only benefits it and the people are against it, it's probably not going to make it into law. So I think of this system as kind of a way to democratize lobbying. And this picture in the background is the Anhui floating solar farm. And I showed a picture in the beginning, just a little more up close. Okay, so now I want to explain how the solar industry in particular managed to reduce the price of solar power to what it is now. So it may surprise you to hear that Chinese solar manufacturing is almost entirely composed of private companies. What's I think particularly ironic is that the expansion of solar production has basically followed your typical right-wing propaganda about how capitalism is supposed to work. All right, intense competition between different solar firms lowered the price of solar panels more and more until these companies were turning out solar panels literally faster than they could be plugged into the power grid, all with a razor-thin profit margin. So at first glance, it looks like the invisible hand of market competition worked after all, and to make a huge amount of a product that the world desperately needs at a low price. Obviously, this would never happen in an actual capitalist country like the United States because in order to achieve this result, the state had to control the process every step of the way. So these solar companies, even though they're private, they weren't created because some genius entrepreneur had a good idea or whatever nonsense. They started out with large initial investments from the government and subsidies. In fact, the government deliberately overinvested, quote unquote, overinvested in the industry to create overcapacity. So that's a term we hear a lot now in criticisms of the Chinese economy, right? But in fact, it's a feature rather than a bug. Uh, Overcapacity in solar panel production, that's unambiguously a good thing, right? We'd much rather have overcapacity than undercapacity. And undercapacity is what we would have if the level of initial investment in this industry had been chosen by the free market. So government overinvestment creates more of the companies than the market would just by itself, and the government doesn't allow them to buy each other out to form monopolies. So this is what leads to the hyper competition. And the only way to survive, for each company to survive, is to develop the technology faster, make their production process more efficient, and by cutting prices. Then the government would gradually phase out these subsidies over time. So the manufacturers had a pretty strong financial incentive to produce more solar panels more quickly in order to get more of that subsidy. That is actually why there was such a spike in solar installations in June, specifically in June of last year, because that's the date where the subsidies expired. So they were trying to get as much of that cash. They had to get their solar panels in by then, basically. So the term for this that you've probably heard lately is involution. And the reason you're hearing it is because the government strategy works maybe a little too well. And these price wars between private solar companies have gotten so aggressive that they're on the verge of bankruptcy again. So the government has to intervene again to keep prices from getting too low. Um, the bottom line basically is that the world gets a lot of solar panels and the capitalists themselves get almost nothing, which I really think is the best advertisement for the socialist market economy that there currently is. Uh, all right, so I want to end on a forward-looking note and give you an idea of what kind of new green technology is under development currently by Chinese scientists and engineers. And I'm listing these in what I think is the order of how close we are to seeing them in the real world. Maglev trains already exist. The only one in commercial operation only goes to the Shanghai airport. But there are some that are currently being tested that will be several times faster than the regular high-speed electric rail. They'll just need new infrastructure before they can start seeing regular use. New types of batteries, particularly batteries that don't use lithium or cobalt, which would be a huge leap forward. Um, and then there's fusion power. Now, fusion power has yet to produce more power than is put into it, but researchers keep breaking records about how long they can sustain a fusion reaction. So I think we'll probably see it eventually. Just it's kind of unknown, when the technology is going to be perfected. There are other research teams in the West developing it as well, but I believe that China's team currently holds the record for the longest sustained fusion reaction. And then we have some a little more science fiction ideas, but these are physically possible and one day feasible. The space gun, for example, that's a project that may take a while to build, but it's theoretically possible to build a railgun that's big enough to launch stuff into space, just using electricity. I don't think a human would survive being shot into orbit like that, but we could send other stuff into orbit uh, that can be used to further develop space and by save all the rocket fuel that we would otherwise use. And then there is finally the orbital solar array, which again, I have no idea how long that's actually going to take, but the concept is to build a space station that sits in orbit and will beam solar energy down to the surface with microwaves. And in theory, that could provide enough energy for the whole planet. So maybe someday we'll see an era of even more abundance in green energy. All right, that's the end of my presentation, and here I have these are my books. On the left, Why the World Needs China is my first book, published in 2024. And China Changes Everything is an anthology that produced by Fosk that I edited that came out last year. And pretty much all the topics that I mention here are discussed in more detail with a lot more facts and figures and statistics in these books. If you're interested, and please look them up. So now I'll hand it back over to Anlin and we can do questions.
All right, thank you, Kyle, for the presentation. Hope everyone can share some appreciation for Kyle for putting this together. That's it's not easy to put together a slide like this, and doing it for the love of the mission as well. So I appreciate you and thank you for the information in the background. Um, we do have a number of questions here. I think we might as well start getting through them. I'm not sure if we're able to get through all of them, but I think that we probably don't, at the very least, we don't have to group them all just by subject and just do them at do them in batches here. Um, so why don't we just get started here if that's okay? But actually, I realized forgot something in the intro I should probably speak to now, which is why we called this ecological civilization in the first place. Just a bit of background on the title. It's because if you look through government documents about environmental policy, or just see Chinese media speaking about environmental policy development, so we frequently references to this phrase, ecological civilization. And so, wanting to have someone who can unpack that phrase a little bit and sort of what goes into that. And I think Kyle did a good job of providing some basic background here. Just a reminder, if you want to submit questions, please do so with the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you're on mobile, I think you'll have to tap in order for that tap the screen in order for that option to appear. And one other reminder, if you're interested in delving a bit deeper in a reading group, we are going to organize one. We're going to announce one sometime over sometime in just a few weeks. We'll announce it. I put the link in the chat. I'll put it again as well after we start getting into the first question for Kyle. But if you want to do that, please fill out the questions there so we can get a sense of what reading might make the most sense. With that, let's get into these questions. The first one is asking if the Communist Party of China takes any insight from I think especially so it speaks of two sort of two eco-socialist philosophies here. One is around the degrowth. One is around the degrowth movement, and the other is around the social ecology. Uh, Social ecology as outlined by Murray Bookchin. Do you have any insight as to whether those sorts of philosophies are influential within environmental philosophy and decision making right now?
Well, I'm afraid I don't know, really. I mean, for one thing, the party, their deliberations are not public, so you can't really say for certain. But I mean, I do know that the party watches the West closely, in not just in economic terms, but political terms. And I think that historically, the Communist Party has been a very keen observer of both the successes and mistakes of its neighbors and peer countries right, and so is able to avoid some of the problems that they've encountered. So for the degrowth or social ecology movements in particular, I'm not sure I'm really that authoritative to say exactly what the contrasts are, but I will say that though during this current phase of reform, um, economic growth is not prioritized any longer. It's the evening out of society that they're more focused on. But that's not to say that the economy and industry are being neglected. Like those are still priorities. China is not going to deindustrialize. Um, so I don't know if the degrowth philosophy is like unilaterally against that, but I know that their ultimate goal is to keep this industrial capacity but turn it green, basically.
All right, thank you, Kyle. There's a bunch of other really good questions here. I think at the pace they're coming, we might not be able to get into all of them. So I'm going to try and prioritize some questions from people. Or maybe I'll try and group these a little bit. Try to prioritize the first questions from people who don't get theirs answered as well. There's another one here about uh, the question is, what policy tools allow China to deploy solar at such a massive scale? I know you spoke about that a little bit. If you could just re-summarize that very briefly. But the second part of this question is asking which of these policies might be also applicable to us here in the United States. I think that section in particular is I think of particular interest to us.
Well, I gotta say that really the path to doing anything comparable in the United States is going to require nationalizing the oil companies. I mean, that's politically a very daunting task, of course. But just the way that our system is set up, we can't do anything meaningfully on a similar scale, just because there's so much entrenched corporate interests preventing it, right? I mean, there's currently a lot of protectionism from the Trump administration. Of course, it's not being used to develop our renewable energy industry. But even like that kind of protectionism, like tariffs, or even subsidies, are just not necessarily going to work. I mean, you're just going to need to nationalize a lot of the economy before that's going to work, and the cost of living in particular is going to need to be lowered. Um, that's kind of a topic that's a little out of scope here, but I think the bottom line is that the state needs to get more involved, and more involved in a way that is not just to ensure that corporations get a lot of profit. Like the government here is very involved, but it's very involved, in the interests of the capitalist class. They need to be involved in the interest of the public good, and that kind of government involvement looks very different, right? It's not just state involvement. It's state involvement it needs to have this particular character.
Thank you, Kyle. There's another question here about how might U.S.-China climate cooperation, this might uh, be a bit abstract, but if I could trouble you to take a stab at projecting, at projecting what this might be, how might U.S.-China climate cooperation potentially impact climate finance in the global South, if that were to occur?
Hmm. That's a good question. The U.S. has and Europe have, in the past made a lot of promises to develop infrastructure in general, not just renewable energy structure infrastructure, and have not made good on these promises. Like there's like a new initiative announced, every year or so, like the Global Gateway, or the build back the world, build back better world, or whatever the Biden administration called it. And they just announced a bunch of projects, and what happens is that usually just, gets canceled or ignored, or the funding just isn't there. Um, so I do think, a joint investment is possible, right? In fact, a lot of Chinese projects are uh, like big infrastructure projects were done with some joint investment from other the capitalist world and from the World Bank, and was able to achieve some positive results. Unfortunately, those kind of partnerships, when they're done with countries that are less sovereign than China, I'll just say, like who don't have the strength to stand up for their interests as much. They definitely don't have that a similar result. And in fact, they can have some very negative consequences because, as we know, the World Bank is not actually devoted to making life better in the global periphery. In fact, rather the opposite.
Thank you, Kyle. And I'll actually just speak briefly to what to this question as well, because I'm going to use this also to make a pitch for joining the Democratic Socialists of America. I think because this question is so important and essential to the future of humanity, and because also that achieving that goal is just so far off, is so far away from the political power that we hold now as a working class movement here in the U.S. I want to ask everyone here who's not a member of DSA yet to sign up and become a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. Because what I would suggest is the answer to this question, how might U.S.-China climate cooperation, essential to saving the planet, how might that also be able to bring justice and energy justice, environmental justice to the global south as well? I would say that's a question that we will have to answer as we build power here in the United States. So if you haven't joined DSA yet, please do so at dsausa.org/join. Um, if you are in a financially difficult situation, the lowest dues per year is $2 per year. But do encourage you to give what you can as well. We need socialist cash to defeat capitalist trash. So um, just wanted to make that pitch there. Of course, I'm very biased as a DSA member, but it is through coming together and building this movement that's how we'll actually be able to achieve and bring some of these things that Kyle talked about potentially into the United States as well. I'm going to move on to this. Okay, so there's another question here about fusion reactor research in China. For the person who submitted this, if what was presented in the presentation doesn't answer your questions there, if you could just resubmit that just with some more specificity, then maybe we can come back to that. There's another question here. I think this is actually there's two questions. I think I'm actually going to bundle these two together because I think these are both thematic and relevant here. Um, First is, can you discuss data centers and how China is trying to avoid the kind of environmental problems that the U.S. is facing with the mass construction of data centers being built across the U.S. For large language model training for AI development? And there's another question here along a similar line. Are there concerns or positive developments with regards to the amount of energy that AI and large language model data centers require of how China is approaching that problem? Um, I think I think we can group them together. If you try and take a stab at those kind of.
Well, I don't think that the scale of data center construction in China is actually even close to the United States, right? I think I recently saw a statistic. I think it was that the U.S. has more data centers than the rest of the world. I don't know if that's it exactly, but it's immense, really. Um, and I think that the approach to AI, China in general, is also very like on a social level, embracing AI in a big way, which I don't entirely agree with myself. But I will say that the way that Chinese AI research is going is, I think, fundamentally different. Right here in the U.S., it's kind of, I mean, it's almost a religion by these big, Silicon Valley types. They think they're building the machine god or whatever. or these like Sam Altman and so on are promising all of these that AI is going to accomplish all of these wonderful things. And really it's I feel like it's not really being used for a whole lot that is actually that useful. And Chinese AI, I mean, in addition to being DeepSeek, for example, being open source, which kind of undercuts the profit model that US AI companies have. AI research is also being directed into areas that I think are much more practical. Um, I remember during the delegation last year, we got to tour the control center of a smart electrical grid um, in Gansu, and they basically told us like this is how we use AI here is to allocate the power and make sure that there are no outages and react to changes in demand and so on, which is supposedly, AI incorporating into this makes things more efficient. So I think, there's some industrial applications to AI that, can be positive, and, those are being pursued by China. There may also be, some kind of, wasteful applications of AI as well. But it's not anything close to the scale that is being pursued here in the US. Uh, and it's really kind of frightening to read about the scale of these data centers and how much more fossil fuel consumption they're requiring. Um, Unfortunately, the government here, of course, is very supportive of AI development, without any kind of restrictions. In fact, the Trump administration has, actually been preventing states from uh, creating their own regulations on AI, which is the complete opposite with China. In fact, China is the world leader in AI regulation, right? They're, among the first to regulate AI to protect workers and make sure that there's not so much waste and just destruction to the economy that AI is wrecking here.
Thank you, Kyle. And sorry to jump in again as the moderator here, but I think that just one other thing I think is relevant here, which I think has significance for us here on in engaging in environmental activism here in the U.S. is the new China has a rule right now whereby new data centers are required to draw 80% of their power from renewable sources. But such a practice would not even be workable here in the United States, at least assuming these data centers were constructed, because simply we don't have that green grid capacity built out. So, in order for us to even get there, we are going to have to, I'll repeat this theme again, build more power. And so, to that extent, just want to just want to make the pitch again to please both join DSA, but then also if you care about this sort of work, this sort of awareness raising, please also join the international committee as well once you are a DSA member. I'll drop the link to join the international to apply to the international committee, which you can only do so if you are a DSA member, dues paying DSA member. But I'll put that link in the chat as we get into the next question as well, which is there's a question here about uh, uh, is um, do you know much about fiber optic broadband development in China? This is a technology that also requires 30-year payback period. I think that's at least has some significance to to power grid infrastructure and other things. But Kyle, is this a question you're able to speak to at all?
I'm afraid I don't know a lot about it. I do know that the past few years, a lot of rural villages have been connected to broadband internet access. In some cases, like at the same time that they're first connected to running water, which is it's kind of a kind of an amazing thing to think about that they're moving so fast or moving so far into the future so quickly from where they were. But about fiber optics, no, I'm afraid I don't know much about it.
Well, it sounds like an area that we need to explore more. So, if this is of interest to you, I certainly encourage people to join the International Committee again. I'll put that link in the chat just right now. Let's get to the next one, though. This is a question. I think this is getting at the relationship between China's green development and its relationship with developing with countries in the global south. And so the question as phrased here is technology given or sold to developing countries? I'm guessing this is probably referring especially to technologies related to green development.
Mhm.
But is this something you're able to speak to at all? Does China engage in technology transfers of green tech to the global south? And if not direct transfers, are there other ways in which that technology is getting into the hands of the global south in some way?
Yes, yes. Well, I mean, it depends on the country and the type of technology and like what particular deals are signed. But I know a few off the top of my head. Lithium mining in Bolivia. There's a partnership with China, and that involves the transfer of the technical expertise needed to develop it. There's new electric vehicle factories that are built with in cooperation with China in countries like Mexico. Um, so yes, in general, if a country is going to partner with China to produce green technology domestically, generally China is willing to transfer the technology as well.
All right, thank you, Kyle. And I'll actually just give sort of one more angle to this as well. Even if it's the case that China might have access to certain patents, so for example, in rail technology and rail construction, they have several hundred, if not thousands, of patents related to how to make rail construction cheaper and faster. So in the course of them engaging in development deals for these, for example, if it's something like rail, as has occurred with like Laos and Indonesia in recent years, there are still so the examples of Laos and Indonesia, there's still Lao and Indonesian engineers who still work on that process, even if it's not a direct handing over of the patent rights from one country to the other. It's still a case that there is still a degree of knowledge transfer, which which hopefully can stay and still continue to benefit that the country that signed the deal. But let me get into another question here. This is about um, so I'll just read this directly. Much of China's focus has been on the supply side of energy. So as you spoke to, building out solar, nuclear, and wind energy capacity, generation capacity. But how can we think about bringing down global energy demand in relation to this? And where do you see any places where the Chinese government has been effective in reducing energy demand in the past several years? And where might opportunities exist to
Mhm.
bring down energy demand?
Well, first of all, energy demand is definitely not declining in China or the world. In fact, it's continuing to increase. Though, I mean, now that renewables, the pace of renewable construction is so fast that despite the increasing demand in China, that new demand is being absorbed, or renewables are absorbing that new demand. So I don't think that it's reducing the demand is really being seriously considered yet. Obviously, in the future, I mean, I certainly have plenty of ideas how to reduce demand in this country, but obviously the Chinese government doesn't really control that. Um, as far as the developing world, I mean, obviously their energy demands are going to increase. I mean, they have to in order to develop, and for people to have decent lives and enjoy the modern conveniences that the rest of us do. So I think that really the concern is to make sure that that new demand is done with renewable energy rather than fossil fuels. I don't think that reducing the demand is that reasonable a goal at this moment. In the future, I'm sure that there'll be some plans for that. Um, but I think that's sort of more the responsibility of the developed world, where we have a disproportionate amount of demand for that.
Thank you, Kyle. Next question here is about um, support for CSA within the Communist Party of China. And CSA here, we must refer to community-supported agriculture. And so just for those who aren't familiar, correct me if I got if this is actually referring to something different. But community-supported agricultural generally refers to, as it sounds, when the local community is supports an agricultural development of farm of some kind in order to ensure that, in order to provide a startup capital to make sure that the growth of the harvest from that go to feed the community first and foremost. Um, and so I guess I'm not sure if they use that abbreviation in China specifically, but I do maybe an analog there might be the development of agricultural cooperatives, although it's not exactly one to one with community supported agriculture models exactly. But do you know are you able to shed any insight on support for community supported agriculture, or is there a relationship between community supported agriculture and the big growth in agricultural communes in recent years in China?
I'm afraid I can't answer that specifically. I do know that the party and the government are very involved in local agriculture. In fact, that's part of the anti-poverty or poverty alleviation initiative is to help certain communities increase their income, and a common way to do that is by selling their produce, um, and developing more income from that. So I think that like community agriculture, like in general, is definitely supported by the government, especially in these poor rural areas. I don't know like specifically how in the party that is discussed and organized. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you. And to the comrade who asked this question, I encourage you to also join the international community so we can further explore how we can, engage people exchange with those working on community-supported agriculture in China, and those working on the development of agricultural cooperatives in China. There's been a big explosion of those in recent years, and see what from the development of those agricultural models we can bring back to the United States as well. Um, Let me see here. Some other questions here. We've just around 10 minutes remaining. Um, there's a question here. Have there been any natural disasters to which uh, in recent years that in and of themselves might have prompted the CPC to invest more into preventing or mitigating climate change?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I wrote a little about these in my book, particularly there was a massive heat wave in 2022, which had some like economic consequences because China also depends a lot on hydroelectric power, and in the summer the river level is lower, so it produces less. So there were some cities that there were blackouts basically because there wasn't enough electricity um, to meet the demand at the time. And also there was a lot of, forest fires because of how hot it was, how hot and dry. So there's definitely some serious climate crises occurring in China, like on a regular basis, right? Temperatures are, just getting worse and worse. So, I got to think that definitely, informs how the party is reacting. Um, I mean, it would be very very foolish if they didn't take that into account because that's something that impacts a lot of people's lives, and uh, just for a moment, I'll mention like the clean air, um, the anti-pollution efforts in China. That was actually very bottom up. Like obviously, people don't want to live with pollution, so they got very angry and organized, and the government did something about it. So yeah, I think just in general, like a lot of the change you see in China is driven from the bottom up more than is typically believed around here.
Thank you, Kyle. There's another question here. I think I want to get to this one. I think this is good and relevant for for a lot of the framework stuff we've been talking about. This question is about cobalt and lithium mining in the DRC. Uh, uh, for just a bit more background here, cobalt and lithium are important minerals for the development of the green energy transition. In particular, they've been essential in the development of new energy vehicles, and a lot of these minerals have been sourced from, especially the DRC, but other parts of the global south, especially. Um, and the mining of these minerals has created a lot of environmental destruction. So the question here is asking about DRC more specifically. I think we can broaden this a bit more to just to speak about this more generally. But the question here is, have Chinese companies in the DRC tried to control ecological damage there from the mining of cobalt and lithium? And I think if feel free to speak to this at a more broadly than just the DRC as well.
Mhm. Well, first of all, I think that these are constrained a lot by the level of regulation in the country itself, right? So Chinese mining companies that enter into joint ventures with the Congolese government, they abide by the rules of the government, and uh, um, there's a partnership there, right? So I just well, I'll say that first of all, like cobalt and lithium being like these conflict minerals, um, China is they're pivoting away from that type of battery, or they're developing new types of battery that don't use those minerals, first of all. But they are heavily involved in mining and developing them currently. And this is something that the government of the Congo also wants. Like they want these partnerships, and they want to develop their own industry and control those resources themselves. And China is the major power in the world that is sort of the best option for this, right? So before China was that involved in the Congo, um, the mining was done by Western multinational companies, particularly Glencore, which is very notorious for human rights abuses and child labor and so forth. They've been sued many times in various Western courts. Of course, it's very difficult to get justice for these kind of things. Uh, and the way that Glencore managed these mines was you know obviously very terrible. And I think if you compare the way that Glencore operated with the way that Chinese companies operate, I think there is a pretty clear difference, and that the Chinese partners are generally part of the solution, and part of the way that they do that is by developing the mining infrastructure, using electrical infrastructure to building new electrical infrastructure to make these mines operate at more productive capacities, and uh, increasing developing the productive forces basically. And this is sort of a net positive, and this is the kind of mining that the Congo wants to engage in, because it's been conducted uh, until now by this sort of artisanal mining, where it's just people using hand tools to carve these minerals, and that's obviously very unsafe, very low paid labor, often slave labor. Uh, though Right. So China, the development of these mines in China, that's going to eventually put an end to that kind of practice. And I do want to say that in terms of these being conflict minerals, there's multiple regions in the Congo where they're mined, and Chinese mining companies are basically mainly in the Katanga province, which is in the south. And the main conflicts in the Congo that are currently happening are primarily in the east in Kivu province, which is near the border with Rwanda, which is where these more unaccountable militias that don't follow the government rules operate. In fact, I believe there was a story about a mining collapse in Congo just a few weeks ago, maybe, or a week ago. I remember reading about, and it was happening in Kivu province. So, I mean, I don't want to like downplay the conditions in mines in the southern Congo. Obviously, there's a lot of room for improvement. Um, but for a lot of these stories, it's not China that's responsible. It's these militias that don't follow the rules. And in fact, when Chinese companies are found to violate the government's rules, the Chinese foreign ministry is very strict about cracking down on them and making sure that they're punished. There was an incident a few years ago where the government accused some Chinese mining companies of violating these laws, and the Chinese foreign ministry replied immediately saying that they would be held accountable and they would be suspended and so forth.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Kyle. That does bring us to time here. So I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. Of course, thank Kyle for his time and creating a presentation for us. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and I hope everyone can consider joining the Democratic Socialists of America if you haven't yet. Links to join are in the chat. And if you are in the Democratic Socialists of America, I hope you can consider joining the International Committee. Link to apply is also in the chat there. Um, Last thing is we are going to start a reading group for the International Committee about China as well. And so if you're interested in that, please fill out the form in the chat. We'll also email it out afterwards as well if you RSVP'd. This event will be recorded as well and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel in a few days. Please subscribe if you have not yet. Thank you again for joining. And with that, we'll adjourn this webinar. Thanks again and hope to see you all soon. Take care.